Welcome to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Established in 2016, the Fintech Times is a global multimedia news outlet centered around the world's first leading fintech newspaper. We report on the latest and brightest ideas from the fintech world. Follow the conversation using hashtag TFD News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times. Hello, and welcome back once again to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. We are back to talk all about fintech news and views, funnily enough. But Francis, Tom, thank you so much for joining me. How have you guys been this week? Francis, how's it going?
Hey, Polly. Yeah, no, it's going really well. It's been an exciting week as per usual. We've been doing some exciting things and there's some good topics on the table today. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome, great stuff. And Tom, how's your week been? Weren't you off at some fancy event earlier this week?
I was. Fancy event indeed. I was at the Fintech Times Festival on Monday and Tuesday of this week. And that was very interesting. Got to see a lot of good panel discussions about all things fintech. And I don't have a story related to that today, but we've definitely got some good topics to get through regardless.
Awesome. Love that. So what is your story about today then?
Today I'm going to be talking about Australia's Commonwealth Bank, which is publicly sharing its AI model in a bid to tackle technology-facilitated financial abuse.
Lovely stuff. And Francis, what's your story about today?
Today, I'm going to be talking about Mangopay and its new cross-border payment capabilities.
Awesome. And then I am going to be looking at Klarna and its new growth tools for businesses. So 3 very different stories today. Tom, I'm going to pick on you to go first because you just had a lot of pep in your voice when you were talking about it.
I got a lot of pep today.
Yeah.
What can I say? So yeah, as I said, basically, what I'm going to be talking about is how Australia's Commonwealth Bank is making its artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques and models available for free to any bank in the world in an effort to crack down on global technology-facilitated financial abuse. So basically, it's got this AI model that helps to identify digital payment transactions that include harassing, threatening, or offensive messages, which is obviously often referred to as technology-facilitated abuse. Currently, this model detects around 1,500 high-risk cases annually. Basically, what it's decided to do is take this model that it's seen success with in having a crackdown in the region on financial abuse via digital banking, and said this is something that banks globally could use. So if we put the source code out there for any banks to access, that could have a big impact globally on financial abuse. So I thought it was just a good news story, really. And the bank's been doing a lot of good kind of work towards tackling this kind of abuse. So part of that is its extensive efforts to combat this abuse. It has implemented an automatic filter that blocks abusive, threatening, or offensive words in its digital payment transactions. And so far, it has blocked nearly 1 million transactions since that was implemented in 2020. And basically, what it saw was that people were managing to circumvent its existing sort of filter. And that's what this AI model comes in to kind of filter out the rest of the people who might manage to circumvent it and still send these types of messages via their banking. And yeah, I thought it was just a really interesting story because it's not often, we always talk about there needs to be more collaboration, but it's rare that we actually have really solid examples, especially in this case where they're really just making the source code for this model available to anyone, every bank in the world that could potentially need it. And obviously banking globally is such a competitive space, and every bank has different techniques and ways that they collect and use data. So yeah, really, I just wanted to talk about, whether you guys expect to see more of this type of collaboration and sort of source code sharing in the future, or do you think, almost the way I see it a little bit is this seems like a bit of a one-off when it comes to the financial world. I think a lot of the time that sort of competitiveness and differences in ways they operate can damage the amount of collaboration that does happen. So really, I just want to get your guys' take on, is this something we maybe could expect to see more in the future, or is this the kind of feel-good story that doesn't happen too often? Polly, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I thought this was a really interesting one when I saw you put it in for today. I think when I first read it, when I saw like the headline, I initially thought we were talking about like sort of like traditional financial abuse of like people taking money, but then obviously like finding out about technology facilitated abuse, which I didn't know was a thing, I think is really interesting, and how the bank has like gone against that and like got an AI model to help protect against that, I think is fantastic. Sharing their source code for this model with any bank in the world over, I think is absolutely brilliant. And I really would, like you say, I would really like to see this kind of, sort of knowledge sharing and source code sharing, etc., more often in banks, especially when it's something that can help people so much in this way. Like, I think I've said before, I always love fintech and fintech solutions that have like a genuine help, that genuinely help people in some way. And this going against, a form of abuse and helping people like, out of sort of these abusive situations by like just completely shutting down this as a method, I think is brilliant. And it's something that I think should be implemented all over the world, but also I think we should see a lot more sharing of source code and things like this, because I think what is the negative here? Like, I don't see the negative. I know you're saying about banks are always trying to be competitive, and I get that, but if this is something that can literally make a single person's day, life, whatever better, then it's brilliant. It's fantastic. So, I mean, good on Commonwealth Bank, really. And I think hopefully we'll see a lot more efforts in this area to help block, abusive messages, or, even any other things. Let's see what people come up with to help people on a financial perspective. But yeah, I think this is a really fantastic thing for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's not often when you think about this type of space, you don't necessarily think about how digital banking could be in some sort of relationship abuse and how that could be used in that way. And I remember, I don't have the numbers to hand, but earlier this year, I think it was, this kind of problem was happening in the UK and how banks were trying to sort of tackle it. And obviously, when there is a problem like this, it's a global, it makes sense that there should be global collaboration. And it's the type of AI model, at least as I understand it, they've just put the source code out there so that anyone can access it. It's very simple for them to do that. It's just, available now on the internet. People can implement that into their systems, hopefully quite easily. It's not going to be a difficult process, and something that could, if implemented across the globe, is going to have a massive impact. And hopefully this type of collaboration, from every continent is going to be the type of thing that continues a lot in the future. And yeah, as you say, I think it can only be a good thing to improve people's lives. And it's the type of collaboration that really there doesn't really seem to be an excuse for not doing. So, but Francis, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think I agree with your initial point, Tom, in that I think it would be really cool if we did start to see a lot of collaboration between banks, but I do think this does feel like a bit of a one-off. It would be fantastic if it wasn't, and this became sort of the standard, and that, technology sharing like this became the norm. But I think I want to say that's probably a bit of wishful thinking. I do think this is fantastic, though, the way that the entire, I guess, product works, in the sense that historically, I think when you think of sort of financial abuse and like your typical sort of trying to scam you sort of for a message or something, and you get sort of harassed that way, I think it's very easy to sort of say that, well, you just got to not be manipulated. It's a bit of common sense. And I feel like the pressures that you get from those messages aren't that bad if you know that they're fake and sort of that they are scams. But I think once you've really got into this sort of technology facilitated abuse, then the pressures are becoming so much sort of more prominent, and it almost creates this sense of inescapability, I think. And I think that is really a big issue that probably isn't brought up as much as it should be. So yeah, in short, I'm looking forward to seeing if this is really applicable across it is going to be applicable across the world, but it'd be really cool to see other banks really adopt a similar, not a methodology, but a similar sort of mindset, and sort of say, this is how we want to progress. So yeah, no, I think it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the words you used there, it was inescapability, and I think that's quite interesting sort of way to look at it, in the fact that this is the type of abuse actually that there isn't a way to block it out for an individual, and it's down to the banks, I think, to really have a crackdown on this. And obviously they're implementing at least Commonwealth Bank are implementing a lot of models and techniques and initiatives to try and crack down on it. So it's just the type of thing that you'd expect to see hopefully spread across the world. And yeah, it's the type of use that potentially could be completely sort of squashed if there is this type of collaboration across the world and really just only have a positive impact on people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Well, thank you, Tom. Francis, why don't you go next?
Yeah, sure thing. So my article is going to be on Mangopay, as I said, the payment infrastructure provider, and they have introduced a new foreign exchange solution designed to enhance cross-border capabilities and support international growth for online platforms. And I thought it'd be really cool to talk about this article first and foremost because it is about sort of payment innovation and simplifying and making payments easier and more accessible, and for organizations to really get all the benefits out of their payments procedures. And this is all relevant because it's our PayTech focus this month. So I thought, putting two and two together would be quite a cool feature to discuss today. So the FX solution, or the foreign exchange solution, I should say, aims to bring more transparency and control to how platforms handle currency conversions in cross-border transactions. The primary goal is to empower these platforms to explore new revenue avenues, offer localized payment experiences to users, and gain better control over their treasury operations. The end-to-end financial exchange solution offers platforms the tools to construct a versatile and adaptable cross-border strategy, and it includes features like Spot FX, which enables platforms to access real-time exchange rates and immediate currency conversion, and Guaranteed FX, which briefly locks in rates to mitigate the risk associated with currency fluctuations. So by harnessing the capabilities of these two features, I should say, platforms can provide localized buying experiences that reduce checkout abandonment rates, take charge of their treasury and liquidity management, and enable both buyers and sellers to handle fund collection and conversion in multiple currencies. So that is the crux of the service. But, I think businesses with aspirations should always be looking abroad. I think you can never really look inwards towards your own local region, even if it is a sort of a localized service. I mean, I always think of Latin America when we think about how many different currencies there are over there, and that, some businesses are optimized for their local payments and local currencies. But in reality is that if you're able to expand a business, you're not only accessing, more currencies and having sort of, it's a bigger market, and there's different demands in different markets. And I think that's something that businesses really need to be able to capitalize on and sort of take advantage of, is that, something might only be, and this I think works well actually with your article, Polly, when we discuss Klarna and sort of how certain regions have adopted certain technologies first and certain, tendencies first. But if you're looking at a global scale, you've really got to be able to, open up your mind and sort of see how you can facilitate these transactions. So, I mean, what I really loved about this article and this product is that it's a fintech helping other digital platforms, right? Online platforms. And I think that at the end of the day is what fintechs are really fantastic at, is, fintechs helping fintechs. These organizations that are digital first, helping other digitally native firms. I think that is just fantastic. And it really is the essence of what fintech can do. So, I mean, this is what I really liked about it. And I think I just wanted to sort of get your guys' views, really, if you'd agreed on that last point about, if this is what fintechs are really for, and if Mangopay is a sort of a stellar example, I suppose, of what a fintech should be. So, Tom, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I think when thinking about sort of cross-border payments, this is exactly the kind of innovation that we need to see globally. One thing that when I was at the Fintech Times Festival that I heard about was a lot of people were talking about cross-border payments, and how even the biggest firms that were there that had representatives there were talking about how much they struggle with the sort of challenges that are posed by foreign exchange and cross-border payments and currency exchange and that kind of thing. And even the companies that are transacting billions across the world still have to kind of be really clever with how they send money, and it's very difficult for them to set it up across the world, and they need to be so engaged in different ways with countries all the way across the world And it's a really difficult space, and it's really crying out for more innovation, because even the biggest companies in the world are still feeling immense challenges and lose a lot of money through this. So in terms of, fintech supporting that, yeah, it's a great example of how they can really ease the space with new innovations. And I think cross-border is the type of thing that it's never going to evolve and see innovation as quickly as domestic payments. But eventually, if that space can continue, I think it will be fintechs that are really going to be the driving force to making sure that they are evolving and progressing in a way that makes them cheaper and makes them easier for companies, however big, whether they're the largest companies in the world or small startups that need to grow globally.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point that you sort of raised there, is this idea that it's not just the startups that have these issues. It is the global juggernauts that we know about. It's not. I think there's probably a misconception that it's always the startups that have these issues, and that once you get to a certain size, cross-border transactions and sort of just payments in general suddenly become the easiest thing in the world, and the only thing is them managing it. But that's not the case at all. It's that there are these growing, that they aren't necessarily growing pains, but they also kind of are. It's these things that you struggle with at first. They don't just go away. They sort of just, as you said, they sort of evolve, and then you need new technology to help evolve to deal with them. So yeah, no, I think that's a great point there. Polly, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I basically echo what you guys have just said, in that time and time again, cross-border payments are constantly coming up as challenges. Like wherever you go, whoever you speak to, 9 times out of 10, they will still tell you that trying to figure out cross-border payments and doing them in their business are still a big issue. And I think, obviously, like you were saying, guys, like that's really interesting, and how that even big companies, big banks, big whatever, even they're still struggling. And that's a really interesting facet of something within like the finance world, the fintech world, and how it's still kind of a bit of an issue. Like you'd think you'd crack it by now, surely, with how long fintech has been going on. But obviously, there are a bunch of sort of challenges in trying to get through these cross-border payments. And I think obviously like the friction associated when it comes to like traditional currency conversions and things like that, and actually moving the money around a world, it makes sense to why it's such an issue. But again, like you guys are saying, it is where fintech really comes into its own. Like fintech really exists to solve problems, right? And it exists to solve problems that banks or other traditional financial institutions have been unable to solve yet, or they haven't solved it in a way that is satisfying to the whole of the market or to a particular set of the market, yada yada yada. So I think you're absolutely right in that this is an area where fintech can do really well, and fintech can have some actual change within the industry and actually make things better and easier. And I think obviously this is a particular example of that in Mangopay and their new solution. So I think, yeah, it's a really interesting one, and one that, having these cross-border payment issues and challenges, really it's something that people just continually, oh my god, I can't speak today. And having these like continuous challenges with sort of cross-border payment issues and currency conversion issues, I think it's where you need fintechs to step up, and you need fintechs to come in and start changing the game. Because if they're still happening now in 2023, then obviously something needs to change. So yeah, I think fintechs coming in, changing things, I definitely think international growth is going to become hopefully a lot easier for a lot of companies with solutions such as this one.
I think the interesting thing as well is that you always, whenever we seem to talk to any company at any point, they always talk about sort of expanding their borders and all this growth that they aim to have. And the fact that there always seems to be a challenge, I think goes to show that there is still a very big gap in the market to really, I don't think, it's kind of like you guys have already alluded to, there's never going to be a solution that gets done at the same time as domestic payments that ensures that they go through quickly, and not only quickly, but they sort of correlate with the correct value of different currencies and all the fluctuations that can take place. It's all very confusing and difficult, but I think it is an exciting space. And I think when you see solutions like these, there's probably still a lot more that needs to be done, but it's very, very encouraging to see this is the direction that things are going in, I think. But yeah, Polly, we'll go to you for your final article.
Awesome. Thank you, Francis. Yeah, so my piece kind of does relate vaguely to the one we just talked about with Mangopay. So it's basically all about Klarna. Everyone knows who Klarna is by now. If you don't, then where have you been? So Klarna, the traditional buy now pay later provider, but now sort of transitioning into just a full finance service provider and payment network, they have launched some new tools for retailers and creators to allow them to better engage with their audiences in more effective ways and enhance the shopping experience for their consumers. So they are expanding their self-service advertising platform Ads Manager into the UK and Sweden after success in the US. And this basically enables engagement between retailers and their high-intent shoppers. So it's essentially a way for people to reach Klarna's 150 million high-intent shopper audience, where consumers share their information with Klarna to receive a more personalized shopping experience. So obviously very helpful to a lot of companies and a lot of people. And retailers in the US, where this platform has been launched for a little while, have seen click-through rates of up to 25% of industry averages. And when it comes to like ads and things like that, click-through rate is really where you want to be. And having a big click-through rate is very nice. So that's one feature that has been released. And they are also looking at Creator Shops, so going the opposite way. After its success in Europe, Creator Shops is now available in the US, which will help people launch their own storefronts on Klarna.com, essentially. So this gives So this allows them to like sort of launch their own storefronts and be able to make their own shopping experience for shoppers to easily find and shop all their favorite creators' product recommendations in one place. So they can recommend products from thousands of retailers, share videos and photo content all around that, and share that on their personal social media channels, so like TikTok and things like that. So it kind of helps get increased revenue opportunities. So I thought this was a particularly interesting one to talk about today, kind of not necessarily because of the new features, obviously, that we will talk about those, but also kind of as a springboard to talk about kind of Klarna itself and how they are moving beyond kind of what they're known for, which is buy now, pay later. Like they are the big name in buy now, pay later. And obviously when we had all that buzz a couple of years ago, Klarna was a name that was, coming up time and time again. They are probably, the biggest company in the buy now, pay later space, but they are now sort of pivoting to be just a more like well-rounded payments network and sort of a financial product provider. They're offering a lot of different products and a lot of different solutions to a lot of different people, to the point where I expect their buy now, pay later services are pretty secondary, I'd have thought, to some of the things that they're offering at the moment and kind of the pushes that they're having. So I just kind of wanted to get your guys' opinion on that and this movement of Klarna going beyond the buy now, pay later into more financial services. What do you think? Is this something that, that is just sort of like a natural progression to all their success within buy now, pay later, and now trying to move on to something else and to like grow and expand their services in a way that kind of makes sense? Or is it something to do with maybe how kind of, the bad press that buy now, pay later got? The buzz has died down a little bit, even though it's still there. And I know because it's coming up to Christmas, I've been getting a lot of ads for different buy now, pay later service. So maybe the buzz is going to come back a little bit. But it's not big news anymore like it was a couple of years ago. Like a couple of years ago, we could go, I don't know, we'd barely go a day without hearing something new about buy now, pay later, or a new comment on buy now, pay later, a trend or research, blah, blah, blah. And now it's definitely died down a little bit. So what do you guys think? Is it just, what do you think about these two new features, new services from Klarna? And what do you think about their sort of transition into just being a payments network rather than the buy now, pay later giant? Francis, what do you think?
I think it's almost natural for a hype around something like buy now, pay later to die down. I remember when contactless first got introduced, that was massive, and everything anyone was talking about, I should say, was contactless. And now it's just second nature, right? You don't even think about it. But I think when we talk about buy now, pay later, it does make sense that, it's slowly becoming the norm. People know about it. People are becoming more aware of the risks associated with it. And so I think it is almost natural for Klarna to sort of think to itself, or think, if I want to survive, I must adapt to sort of what's new. And what is new and what is popular right now is AI. And that is sort of the way that Klarna is sort of trying to pivot itself, I think, is with a focus on AI and an AI-powered payments network, I should say. So I think when we look at these new product launches and and so on. I think it does relate sort of back to what I was saying in my article, that it is really interesting to see how different markets succeed with different product launches at first, and that now that they've been successful in certain markets, they're being expanded to other markets. I'm saying markets a lot here, but I think it does make sense that these services are now being spread out across the world, and that more merchants and more customers are going to have more access to them. And I think that's fantastic, really. I don't think there's any sort of negative side to it. I don't know if we're always going to see businesses take such a big pivot away from something like it. Well, taking Klarna as an example, they became almost synonymous with buy now, pay later. I think if you said buy now, pay later, you'd probably think Klarna. And I don't think it's not necessarily normal for us to see such a giant in the space that they're in to suddenly say, we're not going to just be known for that anymore. We're going to completely take on a new avenue, I suppose. And I think when you look at it that way, I think you sort of got to take your hats off to Klarna and sort of say, fair enough, this is, and the fact that these services are being expanded the way that they are, I think is all the more credit to them. So I think ultimately, I think it's great. I think it's really, really good to see that this rebrand almost has been as successful as it has, and look forward to seeing what else the company comes up with.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there, and I think it's really interesting. I think it does come at a time, I guess, when we're seeing a lot more companies trying to be like the super apps, like the one-stop shops for everything. And I think it makes sense for a company like Klarna to do things like that. But I think, it, like you say, AI is the thing at the moment, and I guess moving into that space and offering products that are obviously working. Like if you look at their, creator shops and the ads manager that obviously they've expanded on, it's working. They're getting a lot of success from their consumers. Their consumers are very happy with it. So it makes sense to be expanding into different sort of areas and different avenues. But Tom, what do you think?
I feel like I'm going to bring the mood down a bit and put my cynical hat on a bit, but I feel like while I do agree that there is that kind of natural progression, and they're kind of expanded on the success that they had in buy now, pay later, I think now almost seems like a very good time to do their best to step away from like BNPL, because obviously we're seeing a lot of regulators look at it a lot more closely and introduce new rules. I think it's going to be a lot more difficult for buy now, pay later firms to operate in the space, and they're going to be watched a lot more closely by the regulators. It's going to be a lot more difficult for them to create a profit, I guess. So I think it's an interesting time, and I think what Klarna are really doing, at least from my point of view, is that, as you guys said, they've just kind of future-proofing themselves. They realize that this is a space that is a bit uncertain, so it makes sense to take a step away from being the BNPL firm and more, rebrand itself as being that sort of support for retailers as well as the the consumers and shoppers. And I find it interesting actually that it's trying to focus on sort of both sides of the coin. It's realizing the opportunity that it's created with BNPL to appeal to consumers and their shopping habits, but actually the way that it's rebranded itself to be almost a side for sort of small startups or individuals doing that sort of on the retail side as well. And interesting how it's kind of serving both sides of the conversation. I think that's really smart, and it's something that these new offerings really help with. So yeah, I think being a bit more cynical, I think it might be because they've been forced into it, but all in all, they've done seemingly they're doing a really good job in that kind of rebrand, and I think it can only really serve them well going into the future.
No, thank you. That's a really interesting viewpoint, Tom. And it's nice for someone else to wear the devil's advocate hat for once, not just Francis all the
I
time.
haven't been devil's advocate for
To be
God
fair,
knows how many weeks at
to
this
be
point.
fair, it's been a few weeks since you've been devil's advocate.
It's been ages.
He's toning it down now.
Yeah, so Tom, you've stepped up, so great stuff.
Someone's got to.
But anyway, I mean, that brings us to the end of our discussion this week. Thank you guys for bringing those articles. If you want to hear any more about anything we've spoken about today or anything else about fintech, head on over to fintechtimes.com. Plenty more news and insights over there. We'll move quickly on to what I learned this week. So each week, so much new news and information across our desks. Being on the editorial team, that we are learning something new all the time. So we thought it'd be fun to share that with our listeners. So Tom, what have you learned this week?
So this week I learned about a new data platform for financial institutions that has officially launched, called Forest IQ. And that's basically a company which is introducing new indicators and data that are going to be open to all in an attempt to drive better action and accountability among key companies and financial institutions on deforestation and really cut down on the amount of deforestation that happens.
Lovely. And Francis, what have you learned this week?
I've learned something very similar, and I was actually going to bring up that Forest IQ if you didn't, Tom, because I also learnt that Echo and Tusk have put a spotlight on conservation through a new partnership, which aims to give payment providers embedded facilities for new conservation-centric dimensions into their products and services. And I think it's quite interesting that this week there's been sort of this focus on, ESG almost a little bit of environmental sustainability and ensuring that, the environment stays about for a bit longer.
See, your guys' are all really nice and very, affirming, and mine feels like a bit of a cop-out, because what I learned this week is that Revolut has adjusted its payment plans and is overhauling it for the first time since its launch in 2018 and for customers in the UK. So, yeah. I mean, we love the battling to help the environment. So, yeah. Anyway, thank you guys for joining me this week. As always, it has been a pleasure to talk about fintech with you. I'll catch you on the next one.
See you guys next week.
See you then.
Thanks for listening to the Fintech Times News and Views podcast. Don't miss next week's episode and continue the conversation using #TFT News and Views and follow us at the Fintech Times.